Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. If China is often cited globally as the ultimate engineering state, a place defined by its capacity for building an industrial scale, why are its policy leaders actively resisting the natural global shift toward services? And what deep tension does this create as they plan for the next decade?
That really is the paradox, isn't it? And it's one we need to unpack. We're looking directly at the core arguments and the underlying strains facing the country as its 20th Central Committee prepares for the fourth plenum. That's happening this October 20th through 23rd, 2025.
And that plenum is crucial because that's where they'll draft the 15th five-year plan, the FYP, for 2026 and 2030.
It sets the direction.
So our mission today really is to go beyond those impressive slogans, that engineering state idea, and maybe challenge the notion that sheer engineering headcount automatically guarantees overall economic excellence. And when you look at who's actually doing the drafting, you see the tension immediately. We know that, over 50 of the 200 voting Central Committee members are engineers themselves?
That's right. A significant number. These are the people sitting down to figure out how to transition a national economy that's, it's clearly shifting from focusing almost exclusively on bridges and widgets to something inherently more subtle, more complex.
Definitely more complex.
But that narrative, the engineering state one, it isn't just a myth. It is built on verifiable scale.
Oh, the scale is staggering. We're talking about what analysts often call the engineering dividend. China possesses this massive technical workforce, estimated around, 19 to 20 million scientists and engineers?
19 to 20 million, yeah. And that technical pipeline, it isn't slowing down. Back in 2022, something like 36% of all undergraduate entrants chose engineering.
36%. Compare that to the U.S. or the UK.
Right, where it hovers around 5%. That level of foundational commitment to technical strength, it's clearly designed to fuel, what they hoped would be endless industrial growth.
And they're not just relying on domestic talent. They're trying to augment this dividend by actively seeking foreign expertise, too. We saw that with the policy coming into effect October 1st, 2025, the K visa.
Yes, the K visa. It's quite a strategic countermeasure, actually. It targets foreign science and engineering graduates, but the really crucial detail, I think, is that it's not tied to a single employer.
Okay, that's a big difference from, say, the U.S. H-1B.
A massive difference. The H-1B often locks the worker to the sponsoring firm. By offering this freedom, Beijing is signaling pretty clearly a desire to pull in global expertise. It gives foreign engineers leverage and mobility they often lack elsewhere.
Okay, but here's where the simple numbers start to feel a bit insufficient, maybe. We have 36% enrollment, 20 million engineers, this proactive visa policy. But can we honestly say that sheer volume is enough for modern economic excellence?
Well, that's the critical analysis point, isn't it? Headcount gets you scale, absolutely. But high-end value today, that comes almost entirely from the capability mix.
Capability mix, meaning?
Meaning engineering excellence isn't just about constructing a product anymore. It's about controlling the entire system. That means having advanced tools, the chips, the lithography, specialized materials, and critically, the high-value services wrapped around those industrial strengths.
Like software, maintenance.
Exactly. Think industrial software, complex maintenance protocols, or even things like international standards, testing, and certification. Those are essential to turn domestic output into high-value global exports. Without that mix, all that headcount just creates, volume, not necessarily value.
And that potential gap between volume and value, that seems to be exactly why the economy itself is pushing against this engineering ideal. We run straight into that central tension. The macro mix is shifting right beneath the leadership's feet.
That is the economic reality check. Manufacturing's share of GDP has trended down. It's now in the mid-20s%. Sources put it around 24.9%, give or take, based on 2024 World Bank data. Meanwhile, the services sector, it's climbed significantly, topping around 56% to 57% of GDP.
That seems like a huge contradiction. Why is a government that clearly prizes industrial output seeing its economy naturally drift toward, hair salons and logistics firms?
It seems like a contradiction, but what's fascinating here is that this shift isn't really a failure of policy planning in isolation. It's actually the predictable global pattern.
The standard development path.
Precisely. Economists call this the hump-shaped arc of development. As incomes rise in a country, productivity gains tend to make manufactured goods relatively cheaper compared to services. You can buy a decent TV for much less than years ago, but a therapist or a good consultant still costs about the same or more.
Right.
So consumers naturally switch their spending towards things like education, travel, complex healthcare, financial services. China is basically following the standard global trajectory of a middle-income country getting wealthier.
Okay, so if the shift is so natural, almost inevitable, why are the engineer leaders in this central committee seemingly so determined to fight it? Isn't accepting the rise of services usually seen as a sign of economic maturity?
It normally would be, yes, if not for the geopolitical headwinds they're facing. The decision to actively fight this natural trend seems rooted in a security imperative fundamentally, the fear of being technologically cut off by rivals, particularly the U.S.
And that fear is probably magnified by the pain being felt in the industrial base itself right now.
Absolutely. We've seen producer prices, the factory gate prices, in deflation for much of the past 3 years.
You mentioned that July 2025 PPI data point was, what, minus 3.6% year on year? Why does that specific number signal such deep structural pain for the engineering sector, for the listener?
Well, sustained deflation, especially at the factory gate, means firms are consistently selling their goods for less than they did the previous year. It's a strong signal of persistent overcapacity, too much supply chasing, too little demand, perhaps. And crucially, it means these firms struggle to generate the capital they need for essential R&D, for implementing that advanced systems integration we talked about, or for investing in the new equipment needed to upgrade their capability mix.
So it's hard to fund the future when your current products are actually losing value month after month.
Exactly. It puts a real squeeze on innovation and upgrading.
It paints a picture of a nation still focused on achieving maximum scale, maybe, but being undercut by maybe insufficient high-end technology and perhaps some global demand weakness as well. Which is exactly why some commentators, like Jonathan Sine, argue that those labels breakneck, world champion of industrial scale, they just fit less neatly today than they might have, say, 10 or 15 years ago.
And this geopolitical pressure, specifically those U.S. export controls against major firms like Huawei and ZTE, that seems to have directly caused a policy pivot, a pivot that actively reversed the previous acceptance of the services trend.
Yeah, the sources reveal a really fascinating flip-flop in the 5-year plans, don't they? The 13th FYP, the one covering 2016 to 2020, seemed perfectly at peace with the services trend. It explicitly aimed to lift the service share of GDP from about 50.5% to 56%.
Right. That was a leadership seemingly comfortable with the natural economic evolution. Then the external pressure really hit hard. The 14th FYP, the current one running from 2021 to 2025, completely dropped that numeric service target.
Just gone.
Gone. Instead, the leadership insisted manufacturing's share must remain basically stable. Now, this wasn't really presented as an economic goal in the traditional sense. It felt much more like a national security maneuver. It reflected a new determination to build a complete industrial system to achieve self-reliance, especially in key technologies.
They were really determined to master those so-called chokehold technologies, weren't they?
That's precisely it. When we talk about chokehold technologies, we mean those highly specialized high-end components, things like advanced semiconductor designs, specialized materials, or the deep ultraviolet lithography tools needed for chip-making areas where China currently lacks full domestic control. The 14th FYP felt like a bid, maybe even a slightly desperate one, to shore up the industrial base by retaining manufacturing jobs, almost regardless of overall economic efficiency.
But, okay, this policy pivot seems to completely ignore the preferences of the actual talent pool they're creating. You end up with this profound mismatch between the huge supply of engineering graduates and the actual demand, or maybe desire, for factory floor workers.
The statistics are quite stark, but I think the roots are also cultural. Graduate intentions, they skew heavily toward IT, toward state-owned enterprises or SOEs, and generally toward services the white-collar sector. A recent survey showed only something like 8% of students actually want to enter manufacturing after graduation.
Only 8%.
Yeah. There's often a deeply ingrained cultural expectation, perhaps, that a university graduate, especially one from a top technical school, shouldn't really be doing blue-collar factory work, even if it's highly skilled factory work.
So you've got a government insisting manufacturing stays stable, while effectively 92% of new graduates are actively looking for careers outside of manufacturing. That's a disconnect.
It's a huge disconnect. You could call it a crisis of application. Even among those who study STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, maths, only about 37% actually pursue engineering-related careers once they graduate. The policy focus really needs to shift quite dramatically towards vocational training and applied skills to improve that job match.
Oh, do I?
Otherwise, you're just generating millions of engineers who perhaps view factory work as beneath them, while the very factories the government is trying to protect suffer from a lack of high-quality, motivated shop floor talent.
Okay, that brings us right back to the drafting of the 15th FYP this October.
Yeah.
If the previous plan, the 14th, didn't really halt the services shift and maybe even exacerbated this talent mismatch, where will the focus pivot for 2026 to 2030? What should we be looking for?
Well, our prediction, based on the pressures and the rhetoric, is that they'll likely move away from setting those hard sectoral ratios, the keep manufacturing at X percentage targets. Those seem to have been quite ineffective. The focus instead will probably be intensely on quality and productivity within both sectors, actually.
What? Okay, so advanced manufacturing depth, not just breadth. What kind of measurable targets or language should we watch for there?
Look for programs focusing very specifically on those chokehold technologies. We mentioned things like power electronics, advanced materials, robotics, and especially industrial software. That's a big one. And crucially, watch for language around standards, testing, and certification. These are often overlooked, but they are the service components that turn advanced hardware into trusted, exportable systems.
Right. Building the hardware isn't enough if it can't be sold globally with confidence.
Precisely. And then on the service side, the policy challenge is quite different. It's how do you boost productivity there without diverting critical resources away from high-end manufacturing?
A tricky balancing act.
Very tricky. It likely means measures designed to sort of make services more like engineering. We're probably talking about massive investments in digitalization, using technology to improve efficiency in fields like health and elder care, huge areas for growth tourism, education, and professional services. These are areas that have often been inefficient, but have enormous room for productivity gains through tech.
So the scorecard is changing then. If they stop targeting sector share, what new metrics should we track to see if the plan is working?
I think the primary goal will be R&D intensity. The 14th FYP already targeted over 7% annual growth in R&D spending. Expect that or something similar to continue. We should also track things like equipment investment in the services sector, which would show a commitment to modernizing that side of the economy. And perhaps most importantly, look at the uptake of vocational or applied training programs. Are they actually succeeding in closing that talent mismatch you highlighted earlier?
In the K-visa, the test for that will be crucial too. It's not just enough that the policy exists on paper.
Exactly. We need to watch the outcomes. Tracking the issuance volumes, yes, but more importantly, the retention rates among those early career foreign engineers. Are they actually coming? And are they finding the integrated high-value jobs, perhaps linking manufacturing and services in key hubs like Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen? That will tell us if the policy is really working to attract the right kind of talent.
So ultimately, the next big leap for China's economy isn't just about building more things, is it?
No, it really seems to be about synthesis. It's about engineering plus services. It's about leveraging that vast technical base they've built to raise service productivity, to standardize and certify industrial output for global markets, and finally, to crowd more high-value, high-paying jobs into the overall economic mix.
You know, this need for synthesis, it reminds me of that classical Taoist fable. It's the story of the foolish old man Yugong, who was determined to move two enormous mountains that blocked his path using just, a simple pickaxe and baskets.
Right, the Yugong Yishan story, an allegory for perseverance.
Exactly. And in the fable, the gods, respecting his unwavering dedication to this immense, almost divine engineering project, eventually stepped in and shifted the mountains for him.
But the interesting part is why he wanted the mountains moved.
Right. The fable suggests that the mighty engineering project itself, moving the mountains, was ultimately performed in the service of something else, enabling travel and commerce. Once the mountains were gone, the road was clear, and the service industry of trade and tourism could flourish in its place.
It's a perfect metaphor, really. The 15th FYP must somehow guide the economy toward that same kind of synthesis, ensuring that the nation's industrial might supports, rather than fights against, the inevitable rise and the necessary improvement of its service economy. That seems to be the central challenge.
A fascinating challenge indeed. Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.